Hello, this is Matthew Heck, and today I'm going to be presenting to you the first part of our presentation, which is about test-driven development. So first off, let's define what test-driven development, or TDD as it is commonly referred to. Let's define what that is. It was a technique that was developed by American software engineer Ken Beck. He developed it in the early 2000s, and according to the book, test-driven development is an approach to program development in which you interleave testing and code development. You develop the code incrementally along with a set of tests for that increment. You don't start working on the next increment until the code that you've developed passes all of its tests. So this technique was first introduced in Agile Extreme Programming, but nowadays it's used in both Agile and in plan-based programming. And basically the idea of test-driven development is that tests are made first, and that code has to pass those tests before you move on to making a new part of the code. Alright, so I'm going to talk to you now about the cycle of test-driven development and the steps that you go through. So the first step in test-driven development is writing a test. When writing these tests, developers have to have a clear understanding of the features requirements, and oftentimes they use cases or user stories to cover these requirements and exception conditions. And these tests will just have to make sure that they define a function or improvements of a function, and should be very succinct. Sometimes these tests can be modified versions of existing tests, and this step one here is really where the differences are between test-driven development and other sorts of development. In test-driven development, so you write the test first, but in other types, you write unit tests after the code is written. So the idea of that, why it's like that, is because with test-driven development, it forces developers to focus on the requirements before they're writing the code, to make sure that they really understand what their requirements are. So the next step after the test is written is just to run all the tests to make sure that the new test that was just written is failing and that the other tests are still working properly. It just verifies that the test was written well and that you're ready to go for the next step. So once that's done, you move on to the next step, which is writing the code. So here, the idea is that you just need to write code to make the test pass. A lot of times, the code that's written in this step doesn't look pretty, and it's okay because the main goal here is not to make good looking code, but it's to make code that makes the test you wrote pass. It doesn't really matter all that much what the code looks like, because later on that code will be altered to look better and to work better. So it's not really important there, it's just important to make the test pass. So the next step then is to run all the tests again. So here you run all the tests because not only do you want to make sure that the new code you wrote works for the new test, but that it doesn't break any other parts of the code, and then it still makes the old test pass. So if any of the tests fail in this step, you have to go back to writing code, and you will continue to go back from this step to step 3 as long as the tests don't pass. So it's a bit of a loop there, and then once you finally get all the tests to pass, then you move on to step 5, which is refactoring. As I mentioned with step 3, the code written in step 3 isn't always the best looking, or maybe not even following the best practices. So here in the refactoring step, you have to write the code in a better way, clean up the code to make sure that it's following the best practices and that it's written as well as it can be. So then once refactoring is done, as long as all the tests are still passing, then you repeat. So you go back to writing a test, running tests, write code, the whole slew of steps once again. And here you see just kind of an image that helps to illustrate this. You receive a user story, you analyze that story, write tests, make them pass, refactor, and then it all starts again. So that just kind of gives a more succinct version of it. And that is all for my part of the section, and you'll continue to hear more from the later sections.